Chapter 12. Fishing. "Oh, never mind," Buck Jr. said. "I'll just have a beer." Francie heard the fridge open, the clinking of glass, then the fizz of a bottle opening, followed by the ting of the cap on the counter. Then the click of heels on the tile floor, retreating. She resisted the impulse to heave a sigh and stepped out of the pantry into the kitchen. "What were you doing in there?" Buck Sr. asked. Oops. She should have counted the number of feet retreating. She'd have to remember that in future sleuthing situations. "Me?" Francie squeaked. "Looking for a glass?" "Couldn't find one," Buck said, nodding toward her empty hands. "They all look too nice," she answered. "I just wanted an ordinary glass, like the one you've got." She nodded at the glass in his hand, filled with ice. "You know, for a glass of water." Buck took a tumbler out of a cupboard and filled it with water from the tap, then handed it to her and grunted. "Made a decision about that property yet?" he asked casually, but his stare was intense, his eyes moist with drunkenness or desperation. Francie couldn't tell. She knew what her aunts wanted her to do, say yes, but she couldn't. "Soon," she said, "just checking on a few things." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Then again. It made her think of a Finnish folk story about why fish do that. They think they're talking, but since they're underwater, they can't hear, so they just go through the motions and it seems like talking to them. "Listen," he said, suddenly sounding very drunk. "Let's go fishing." He flung an arm around her. "Sure, Buck, I'll go fishing with you sometime," she said, uncoiling his arm from her shoulder. "In a few days, maybe." He didn't know that in a few days she planned to be gone. "No," Buck said. "I think we should go right now." "I just got here," she protested. "Nothing going on here," he said. "Come on, let's go." He grabbed her arm, steered her through the kitchen, down a set of stairs, in and out of several rooms. Francie craned her neck to look at the architectural digest-worthy furnishings, art, and flower arrangements. Wow, Frederica had made some solid money. Or the money was courtesy of her husband, Francie supposed, who knew what business he was in. Finally, while crossing a series of decks, Francie started to get nervous. Buck had not gotten distracted or changed his mind through all those rooms. He was still dragging her toward the dock. She did not want to go with him. Probably not ever, but for sure not right now. She still hadn't met the theater people. There were bound to be some at this party somewhere. "I want to tell you something," he said. "I think you'll be extra interested in it, you being a detective and all." Ugh, he would dangle that enticing tidbit in front of her, although he really was too drunk to drive a boat. "All right," she said, "if I can drive the boat." "All righty," he said, "if you can drive the boat, you can drive the boat." He laughed at his own joke. "Which one's yours?" she asked, surveying the jumble of boats and the big pontoon tied to the dock. She intended to get in first and start it before he could. Somehow, he was at the motor by the time she climbed in. He pulled the starter cord a few times, revved the motor, and they were off. Why was he driving an ordinary fishing boat, she wondered? Didn't he have a big speedboat parked at Sandy's? As if reading her thoughts, he said, "Buck Jr. took the big rig somewhere. This here one is better for trolling anyways." It was the tail end of twilight. Just the two of them in the boat, exactly like in The Godfather when Al Pacino, or whoever it was, took Freddie out in the rowboat. She would be the Freddie character, she thought glumly. Or was it Fredo? Anyway, the one who doesn't come back. She looked longingly at the shore, rapidly becoming a dark smudge. You could tell where the Fredricksons' house was, though. The place looked like a cruise ship run aground. Electricity, she thought. They had it. Buck cut the motor and offered to bait her hook. She took him up on it, since the bait was leeches, and she cast her line into the dark purple water. They fished in silence for a while, Then suddenly he said, "You lie, right?" "I beg your pardon?" Francie asked. "I mean, as a detective. I've seen them shows. Them detectives are always lying in order to get a confession or whatever. So do you?" Francie swallowed. What was the right answer to that question? Of course she was lying right now by pretending to be a detective. She didn't see any reason to tell him the truth. "I guess you could call it that, but we prefer the term professional discretion." "Professional discretion," he repeated. "I like that." He was silent for a moment, and Francie listened to the waves nudging the boat, pushing them toward the shore. That gave her some comfort. The sooner they got to shore, the sooner she could get out of this boat and get back to meeting the right people. "Well, then, I guess you know how it can happen," he was saying. "You just tell a little white lie and then another, and pretty soon you're really pretty good at it. Easy to lie when you're in real estate. The job almost requires it. It's just a matter of how much you're gonna lie, you know? Where's the lying gonna be? Them detective shows, telling little white lies? Catch the culprit? Figure you know what I'm talking about," Buck finished. "What?" she said. What had he just said? She'd been thinking about how best to approach Mrs. Fredrickson. "Are you Catholic?" Buck asked. Francie shook her head. "Well, in Catholicism, there are sins of commission and sins of omission. Things you do and things you don't do. Things you say and things you don't say. You might just not say something. That's an omission. Just don't mention that a house has had water in its basement, you know? It probably never will happen again anyway. That sort of thing. Not what you'd even call a lie." He jigged his line a bit. "What would be a lie?" Francie imitated his jigging style. Buck didn't say anything, and Francie took a moment to reel in her line and check her bait. "You think they've been nibbling at this?" she asked, dangling the leech in front of Buck. "Does it feel like they're nibbling at it?" "I guess not," she said, and threw her line back in the water. "What would be a sin of... what was that other kind of lie?" "Commission," Buck said. "That might be something like misshowing where the property line is. There are lots of ways to lie a little bit without it seeming like lying." "Uh-huh," Francie said. She shivered involuntarily. "Cold?" Buck said. "I have a jacket you can wear." Okay," Francie said. She wasn't cold. She was scared of where this conversation was going. Good thing it was dark so he couldn't see her face, she thought. Even though she was frightened of what she was about to say, she heard it coming out of her mouth anyway. "It sure seems odd," Francie said, trying to sound casual. "How many accidental deaths there have been out here." "It's a very dangerous place out here without a road," Buck said. "No way to get to a hospital quick, not even anywhere a helicopter could land." The Fredricksons' expanse of lawn flickered through Francie's mind, and she wondered if important, busy, influential Hollywood people came and went that way. "You've been busy buying cabins along this shore," she went on, as firmly and calmly as she could, "and agreeing to allow the inhabitants to live in there as long as they'd like to." "Life estate, it's called," Buck said. "It's perfectly legal, if that's what you're wondering. Now, I know it's hard for you to accept," he went on, "but these people are getting old, Francie. Naturally, they're going to start dying." "But they're not dying from old age, Buck. They're dying from weird accidents. There are so many of these accidents that they start seeming suspicious to the casual outsider." Casual outsider? Had she just said that? What was that supposed to mean? "That's just the police lady in you thinking that," he said that rather derisively, she thought, as he stumbled on. "And if a person did off a few of these old people, who would blame 'em, really? There's such a thing as progress, you know. But these people don't seem to know it, with their cobwebby little places full of carpenter ants and mildew. There could be brand new $1,000,000 places going along here, you know." "And that would be good?" That'd be good for all the people who'd like a nice place to live that doesn't take a day and a half to get to by boat. What a hassle. Do you know a lot of these people? Those people, he nodded at the party house. They all want a place here on this side of the lake. They do? Francie looked longingly back at the party house. What do they like about it? It's unspoiled. Well, wouldn't putting condos up and a road in, spoil it? Spoil it? It would make it accessible, he said, as if she might not understand the word. Accessibility doesn't spoil anything. It just makes the unspoiled places accessible. What does spoil a place? Sour old people, he said grumpily. So, have you been getting rid of some of these sour old people? It seems like some of them are people whose cabins you've purchased. She couldn't believe that came out of her mouth, but there it was, plopped out in the boat as if it were a fish on the end of the line. He seemed to stare at it for a while, there at the bottom of the boat, and then said, Now, wait a minute. I never said I killed anybody. Some people have basically killed themselves through their own carelessness or stupidity. I don't see that it's my fault. A burst of fireworks went off on the other side of the lake, twinkling brilliantly against the now dark sky, followed a few moments later by a series of pops and bangs. Francie remembered that Mrs. Fredrickson had said they were going to shoot off fireworks on the dock later. She hoped she lived to see it. I'm not in the habit of poisoning wells, you know, Buck was saying when she tuned back in. A guy could do it, though, just the right amount to make someone sick, if he knew the right amounts. Wait, what? What did Buck just said? A guy could poison a well, Francie repeated. Could a guy make a tree branch fall down and kill someone? That's what I'm talking about, Buck cried. What kind of person would go to sleep in a room with a big tree branch dangling by a shred over the roof? Wouldn't you think they'd check? Who'd think a branch like that would crash through the roof? You'd think it would just put a dent in it. Francie shook her head as if she couldn't believe the stupidity of some people. And the water moccasin? Speaking hypothetically, of course, how would a guy come up with an idea like that? God, she prayed, what am I doing? Again, proving the stupidity of people. You'd think a herpetologist, Francie asked? A person who studies snakes? Yeah, that's what that Simonson fellow was. He had crates full of them things. Frankly, the whole area is safer without them snakes around. I'm a pretty good swimmer, she thought. If he just throws me in, I can make it, as long as I can get out of this ridiculous jacket. She knew she should say something and found herself talking like her detective character. You were out in the boat with Wally Hansen the night he drowned too, weren't you? She asked. He gave her a sidelong glance. She hoped he couldn't tell that under his warm jacket she was shaking. What would my TV detective character ask right now, she wondered. Then she knew, but thought, oh God, this is the one that'll get me thrown overboard. I've got one more question, she said, about Warren. Buck busied himself with his tackle box. Now you're just crazy, he muttered, but he seemed noticeably more nervous, all darting eyes and licking lips. I'll tell you one thing, he said finally. You're barking up the wrong tree. He snapped the box shut, sat up, and said, Here's something I do know about. Something that happened a long time ago. Francie's insides turned to water. A lake filled with schools of swarming minnows, swarming and swimming, jostling and bumping into each other. Somehow, she knew what he was going to say before he said it. Something having to do with your parents, he finished. The minnows jolted to a halt, then sloshed back and forth, waiting. I can tell you something about your mother, he said. Their eyes met. In the dark, His eyes glistened like something amphibious. Francie glanced away, her gaze resting on Buck's tackle box. Maybe her heart was not kept inside a pretty silver box somewhere, she thought, but instead inside a battered plastic box tangled in monofilament and pierced with spinner and daredevil hooks. No, she thought. She didn't want to hear anything from him. This was not the way it was supposed to happen. This was not the way she had envisioned hearing about her mother. Somehow, it didn't seem like it would be anything good coming from him. Still, nobody else had ever offered any information. Shouldn't she at least find out what it was? "What do you—" she started to say, but there was a sharp yank on her line, and her fishing rod bent over, twitching. She gripped the rod with both hands. "Reel it in," Buck barked. "Definitely a fish," she said. "It's not the bottom." She could feel the fish struggling on the other end, then diving. The reel made a groaning click with each turn. "Must be a lunker," Buck said, scrambling around in the dark for the landing net. "You got it okay?" "Yeah," she said through gritted teeth. "It'll hold," he said. "That's 30-pound test line." She reeled and reeled. It felt like forever. Then suddenly she saw the thing, a big walleye, rise just below the surface, its dusky side gleaming like pewter. "Bring it closer to me," Buck said. "Bring it over here." "No," she said. "You bring the net over here." Buck leaned over to snag the fish, but his boots went out from under him, and the net dropped into the lake. Momentarily startled, Francie let up on the tension, and the fish swam free, giving a flip of its tail and then diving back into the black depths. "Dang," Buck said. "Get your net at least," Francie said, reeling in her line. Buck reached out for the landing net, but boat and net were quickly separated as the boat drifted away. He scrambled back to start the motor, grunting as he pulled at the starter. Voices drifted out over the water from the party. The voices had grown louder, and there were peals of brassy laughter, then a series of splashes accompanied by squeals and shrieks. It sounded like the young people's party had moved outside and off the end of the dock. She reeled in her line, secured it with its now empty hook, and was just setting the rod down when a movement by the side of the boat made her jump. A dark shape lunged from the water, as if the fish were coming for her. She yelped, then saw it was the head of a person. It was that guy, the same guy she'd glimpsed in Fredrickson's family room. He raised his glistening, and she couldn't help but notice, nicely muscled arm, holding the net in his hands like a trident, like one of those gorgeous Greek gods. Neptune, maybe. Or was Neptune a Roman god? "Lose something?" he said, dropping the net into the boat. Francie, having lost her breath, was unable to respond audibly. The motor kicked in, and Buck yelled, "Hey, kid, watch out!" Buck steered for the dock while the young god swam backward, out of the way, and disappeared into the darkness.